Hi, everyone. I'm Vanessa Parker, co founder and CEO of MAG. And today we are having a wonderful conversation. It's about the abuser's perspective, a conversation about domestic violence in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. As a clinician and advocate, I cannot express enough how important this subject is in my line of work, but also in educating our community about the impact and prevalence of intimate partner violence. And I can't think of a better voice, expert, fighter, educator, and so much more than our guest today, Miss Bea Cote, who has many years of experience working and advocating in this area. But before we dive into this conversation with Bea, here's a little bit about her. She is a licensed clinical social worker. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, the founder and executive director of Impact Family Violence Services and Step Up, and has worked with abusers for over 25 years. Her work is nationally recognized, and you'll soon realize why. She has served as chairperson of Domestic Violence Advocacy Council in Charlotte, North Carolina, Charlotte City Council appointee to Domestic Violence Advisory Board, and North Carolina Providers of Abusers Treatment. B, again, I love you. I love the work that you do. You're just so important and such a gem that I'm blessed. I'm grateful that you chose to be with me today to talk about this subject. So thank you.
Well, and I feel so special that you've asked me. I'm thrilled. And you and I have been like mostly Facebook friends for a really long time. And anyway, I really admire you as well. And so I feel very blessed to be here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I want to jump right in because, as I said before, I want to honor your time. But I'm very curious. How did you get started working in this line, in this area? This scope of practice. What is your why?
It was an accident, and I never meant to stay in this field. I didn't like this field, but I was a child protective service social worker, and I specialized in sex abuse cases. And then in the mid 90s, we just really started recognizing the role of domestic violence in child protective services cases. And so they wanted to send people to training, to train on domestic violence. So I'm like, I'll go. I love going to conferences and stuff. So I went to all the domestic violence trainings and got to know a lot of the advocates in the area, that kind of thing. And then when a job came open in this field, running a what used to be called a batterer intervention program. We now call them other kind of things, but I I sought the job and got it, and I said, okay, I'm only going to be here for a little while because I'm not working with these crazy people. And and yeah, and then you kind of get hooked on it. And so I actually loved working with. I work exclusively with men who offend, who abuse, right?
Mhm.
But by working with them, I also work with a lot of victims, and I worked with victims when I was at DSS. And the reason I thought it would be a really good step for me to take that job is because I wanted to be able to work with these dads
Mm.
and to work with them as fathers to try to see what I could do to help them become better fathers. And I was so disappointed in
Yeah.
how few of these dads gave a damn
Mm.
about their behavior. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I was so
Wow.
disappointed. But for me, like, one small success has always been enough.
Yes.
I learned that in my early 20s, right?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
I wasn't going to fix everybody. In my early
Right.
20s, I thought if I was just really friendly and smiled a lot that I was doing something.
Exactly, and making the change that you wanted to see.
Right, there we go,
Yeah.
I fixed them.
That's right. Everything's good. Everybody's great. I'm glad
Everybody's
that you
happy.
shared that. So trying to work with dads to see if maybe they could help change the trajectory for the next generation and how
Right,
disheartening it is, or is it that you tried to do that work, but ultimately it has to be on their terms and how they apply the tools that
right,
you've given them.
exactly, and that's with all of them. Not just the
Ah,
dads,
yeah.
but the dads are why I came into it.
Mhm, mhm. Interesting. I'm glad you shared that because I don't think a lot of people know that, and I wasn't aware that
No,
of that specifically,
I
but
don't I don't remember ever really talking about it, at least not in years.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm glad if I brought it out, I'm happy. What I want to hear from you, so it's great that you shared that you primarily work with the men, but that you've also you've provided support and services to the victims. How do you define domestic violence and IPV, intimate partner violence? Because I like people to understand there's a difference.
Right, right. I work in intimate partner abuse, right? But domestic violence is a more broad definition. And that's because in North Carolina, at least, our laws say domestic violence is much more than intimate partner abuse, right? But
Hmm.
and so it could be family violence in the
Hmm.
home, right?
Yes.
But I work with intimate partner abuse, but domestic violence is such a well-known term. For instance, it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month,
Yes.
but really not working about on the uncle who assaulted his adult niece.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I say DV, I'm really meaning intimate partner abuse.
Intimate partner. Thank you for clarifying that. When I think about our community and talking about domestic violence, I don't know if it's fear, I don't know if it's a lack of education or a misunderstanding or myths, but what do you say to people who think abusers are just angry or that they have a mental health disorder to explain away their behaviors? How do they get that way?
Okay, let me give you some little tips and tricks, okay?
Yes.
All right. First of all, most domestic violence, almost all domestic violence, is committed because of a belief in entitlement. There's something that entitles them to believe that they have the right or even the obligation to abuse. Okay, that may
Mhm.
come from a number of factors. And so it could be anything from being mad at her to being hurt by her to having his feelings hurt to feeling like he's the boss and she's not doing what she needs to do and he's entitled to discipline her. And so it could be a number of things. But when you blame it on, let's take anger management to start. When you blame it on poor anger management, which I still see all of the time, because that's not a label that people are unwilling to accept. Okay, I have a bad temper, right?
Yes. Yes.
That doesn't label people like I'm an abuser does. Okay,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
so the reason it's not about anger management, and I'm saying it's not about anger management. There may be anger,
Yes.
but it's not about anger management because who else do they abuse when they're angry? If they
That
wait
part.
until they get home
Right.
to abuse her, they have managed their anger all day
Elsewhere.
until they got home.
Yes.
So they have the skills, they just choose not to apply them with her.
Mhm.
And that goes back to entitlement. Okay.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, ask who else do they abuse? Okay.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's the one tip. And
Yes.
then with mental illness is there is no mental illness that causes you to pick and choose your victims as well, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
If I'm not saying that there aren't extreme mental illnesses that don't cause violence,
Sure.
right? But they would be violent toward anybody who's around.
Yeah.
Okay, like the guy who in Charlotte just what last week shot the clerk, the worker at the fast food for getting his order
Right.
wrong.
Right. Right.
Okay. That is mental illness or anger management, right? But so, those folks can be angry
Mhm.
or mentally ill on anybody.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then the other one I hear quite a bit is a blaming on the drinking. Okay.
Yeah.
So about half of domestic violence murders um, include somebody, the abuser is drunk, right? So drinking does not cause domestic violence. Alcohol does not cause domestic violence,
Mhm.
but drunkenness can make it a whole lot worse.
Yes.
So I'm going to shock your listeners right now. I ask my guys who blame alcohol on their
Yeah.
use. I ask them this question. I said, "What do you like to drink?" And they'll say, like, I don't know, uh, vodka. And I said, "Well, how many shots of vodka would it take for you to have sex with your grandmother?" And they're
Mm.
like, "Oh, I would never do that, Miss B. I don't even know why you say that." And I'm like, "So there are some things you would never do, no matter how drunk."
Mhm. And you have the capacity to decipher between the 2,
Right,
much like
even
the
when you're drunk.
anger.
Right,
Exactly. So, with the anger, there are certain people you will go attack and go after, and there are some you will not. So, it's
right,
similar to the drinking. Why is it okay that you would consider this versus that?
right.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, which means that it's a decision-making process, which means
Correct.
all of this means that they decide to abuse.
That's right. That's
If I
right.
ask my guys, um, I'm not gonna I don't wanna talk bad about Gaston County, but
Yeah,
it
yeah.
if I ask my guys in other groups, if I say to them, "If you knew that you were going to jail automatically, the
Mhm.
minute you abuse her, the police coming over and they're taking you to jail. They're
You're
not asking
gone.
questions. You're gone for a year.
Yes.
Would you still abuse her?" And they're like, "Well, no."
Choice.
Choice.
It boils down to choice. I choose not
Choice
to do
and
it if I knew
decisions.
what the consequences,
Right.
stiff penalties will be.
And sometimes they will no matter what. Sometimes they're so angry that they will abuse her even knowing they're going to jail, right?
Mhm,
But
mhm,
it's still a
mhm.
decision-making process. They still
Yes,
consider it.
that's right.
So
That's
in
right.
those cases, it's perceived consequences. They take those into consideration and decide to go with it anyway.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you for sharing those tidbits. That's really important, and that's a great way to look at it, because it comes down to I'm choosing to do this because that's what I want to do. Because that's what I choose to do.
Right.
And sometimes, no matter the consequences, I'm going to follow through with that, as evidenced by protective orders, right? When women take out orders to protect themselves and or loved
Right.
ones from offenders or abusers, it's like that's not enough, and I'm still going to bypass that's put in place legally to just do what it is that I'm choosing to do.
Right.
Mm.
Exactly.
Mhm, mhm.
And
Wow.
but what's important to know about that too is that's not the way my guys see it when they first come in, of course.
Or
Here's what happens when they come to me.
yeah.
They come to me believing themselves to be the victims.
Mm.
Why? Because they've been hurt. They've been hurt by the consequences of their behavior, right? Whether it's an arrest, whether it's a separation, whether it's losing a job, whatever, right? They've been hurt by the consequences of their behavior. So therefore, they're in pain. And if they're in pain, they're victims. And
Mhm,
if they're
mhm.
victims, then the person who caused them pain is their abuser.
Wow. Regardless that the behavior began with them and their choice to do what they wanted to do. Now
Right.
that it's impacting them negatively, someone has to pay for that hurt
Right,
and pain.
because they're in pain, and it may be psychic pain, it may be, like a pain of loss. There's Tony Porter with A Call to Men. I believe he's the one that says this, that anger is the result of other emotions. Other
Mhm.
people say that it may not even be an emotion in
Uh-huh.
itself.
Uh-huh.
Hold on a second, I've
Sure,
got
sure,
somebody
sure.
calling in.
Mhm.
Um, but anger itself is usually a mix of other emotions, which include often fear and pain. So the fear could be fear of a loss of the relationship. Many of these guys are emotionally dependent on their partners that they
Mm.
abuse.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
She is
Mhm.
their ride or die. And if there's any inkling that she may leave the relationship,
Yeah.
that's when it amps up. What the studies tell us that about 75 to 78% of domestic violence murders happen because she left or was leaving.
Correct.
And I start looking at not the police reports. The police reports only document an official separation. She had established herself somewhere else, et cetera, et cetera. She had a restraining order, anyway. But the news reports where they talk to the family and the friends who say she was trying so hard to leave him. She was in the middle of
Yeah.
leaving him. She had just left him. He made her come back. When you take those into consideration, I guarantee that it's closer to 90 to 95% of
Mhm.
murders happen because she left. And
Yes.
that's because he may never even have abused her physically. We know a
Right.
lot of those
Yes.
cases.
Yes.
And then he kills her or tries to kill her
Yes.
because she left.
Yes.
Because that that separation to him is a level of deceit, and especially if she was trying to hide preparations behind his back, that
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
such a loss to him.
Mm.
And so, she may have become a part of him.
Yes.
And especially if
Yes.
they've been together a really long time and then she has the
Mhm.
courage to leave, which most of those victims don't. Um, and she leaves, he could actually feel it as if it was the loss of a limb.
Yes.
And the
That
pain,
intently. Yes.
that intently, and the pain to him is unbearable. And so then what can he do to excise the pain and to make her pay for his pain?
Mhm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. So
That's
here
why
we
we should
have.
never encourage anybody to leave an abuser.
Right. Right. Because sometimes no matter the preparations, it's that threat, that perceived threat that
Right,
sends them to that level of having to, like you said, excise that pain. And what do I need to do? Well, the person that caused the pain has
right.
to pay for
Has
that.
to pay. And you know what I'm seeing a lot more now, Vanessa? And I don't think it's happening more. I think I'm seeing it more, is what
Mhm.
we call post-separation abuse. Have you ever
Yes,
heard of
talk
that?
about that. Yes, I have because of you. So tell us a little bit about that.
That is when a couple has separated. Oftentimes it's because she has left him, and what happens is then even if he's never been physically or criminally abusive before, and by the
Mhm.
way, most domestic violence is not criminal, and most domestic
Mm,
violence is not physical.
right.
And so we may not recognize what's
That's
going
true.
on unless there's been a beat down, right?
Correct.
And so when this separation happens, and family law attorneys are very complicit in this, and that's
Mm.
why I train a lot of attorneys,
Mhm. Mhm.
is the attorneys will encourage, he'll go get an attorney, right? And he's already told her if they've got kids, he's going to get the kids, which may
Mhm.
be what kept her in there for a really long time.
Right.
Anyway, there's such a thing. You're probably all familiar with the power and control wheel. There's
Absolutely.
also something called, if you Google it, a post separation abuse wheel.
Yes.
And what happens is they will use the courts and finances to continue to abuse her or to start abusing her. So she may have seen it as just a bad relationship or
Mhm. Mhm.
toxic relationship,
Mhm.
but she
Mhm.
may never even have recognized any domestic violence because let's say there hasn't been any physical
Correct.
domestic violence, right?
Yeah.
And so she leaves him. Who's the one with the money? Let's say she was a stay-at-home mom.
Mhm.
Who's the
Mhm.
one with the money who's going to go out there and get the most expensive attorney
Mhm.
that's known
Mhm.
to be, a bulldog attorney?
Right.
And what they're going to do is the attorney is going to encourage him to be on the offense, right? And to go ahead and try to get her for everything.
Right.
They'll even encourage these guys who've never changed a diaper to go for full custody,
Mm.
right? And so
Mhm.
now she's on the defensive
Correct. Yes.
with probably a more limited income, if any at all.
At all. Yes.
And they'll take her through the courts. I once heard a young man in a conference one time say that his parents uh, separated while his mother was still pregnant with him because of the abuse during
Mhm.
her pregnancy. His father kept the mother in court until this young man turned 21 years old
Wow.
over custody of a child that he was a sperm donor.
My goodness. The harm that that does, not only to the mother, but also the child who's
Absolutely.
growing up in that environment or
Right.
having to deal
And
with that
and who
situation.
doesn't have a choice
Right.
at first, until their adolescence, and then they're told that they have to have a relationship with their fathers. And by the way, a lot of women don't leave because they think that he's a good dad or that it's important that a child have their father in their life. So they'll
Mhm.
continue to allow the relationship
Yeah.
and not get out
Yeah.
because they want to be a good dad.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this.
Yes.
Lundy Bancroft,
Yes. Yes.
all right, Lundy Bancroft, any of his books, he's
Mhm.
got a great
Mhm.
book called Why Does He Do
Why does
That?
he do that? Yep.
He
Mhm.
also has The Batterer as Parent.
Yes.
And here's what he says. If a person is abusing the children's mother, he is abusing the children, even if he's never laid a hand on them.
True.
Because what is he teaching
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
child? And
Right.
then, are you familiar with the ACEs, the
Yes, I
adverse
am.
childhood? Okay.
Yes, I
So,
am.
one of the traumatic experiences that a child can have is parental separation. Another one is witnessing domestic violence.
Domestic violence. Yes.
And what we know from the research, especially that's come out of the ACEs studies, is that witnessing trauma, being traumatized, witnessing domestic violence can alter the
Mhm.
brain chemistry of a child
Yes.
and can change the DNA.
Yes.
So if a child witnesses domestic violence, repeated domestic violence, or severe, that can change their DNA and can actually then change their great grandchildren.
Isn't that interesting? Because of witnessing an experience, not having to take part of it, and as you said, having been directly impacted by being physically or verbally or whatever abused themselves, but
Right.
being a part of it, it can negatively impact them and the generations to come.
Right.
Wow. Wow. That is great, great knowledge and information sharing here because I don't think a lot of people pay attention to that. As a child witness of domestic violence myself, I can see how that can negatively impact someone's life, how you
Right,
perceive the world, how you look at, the relationship between mother and father, or in an intimate relationship
right,
yourself, the
right,
role, the trajectory of that. So it's just
right.
crazy. It really is. I do want to ask a follow-up question to that. When you think about the different men that you work with, are there any character traits or common threads that you see in all of them?
I just want to say that I work with so, so like in Charlotte, my guys tend to be self-referred, like corporate types,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
referred by their couples counselors or their partners. And in my other counties, they tend to be more criminal court referred or DSS referred. But what I know from the men I work with is that there's really the only ones who, gosh, I don't know how to say this
Mhm.
because then I think of, I'm going to say something and then I think of an exception to that example.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
they come from all walks of life. They are quite literally your brother, your best friend, your best guy friend,
Yeah.
your pastor,
Mm.
your postal carrier,
Mhm.
okay,
Mhm.
your plumber. Um, they're self-employed, they're wealthy, they're on a corporate board,
Yeah.
um, they're day laborers, they're disabled and unemployed. I mean, and they're of every race. Black women, though, are at the highest risk. Black women are abused more than any other demographic.
Why is that?
I think that the only crossover, and I say this again because there's so many exceptions,
Sure.
poverty.
Mhm. Mhm.
And let's say that you are living in an area like I live here in Charlotte with a lot of apartment buildings,
Mhm.
less expensive apartments. People are on top of each other. The walls are paper thin.
Mhm.
People are
Mhm.
going to hear a beat down
Mhm. Mhm.
and may call
Mhm.
the police, right?
Yes.
And a poorer person is not going to have access to the high powered attorneys like these NFL players or these NBA players
NBA player. Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
have, right?
Mhm.
And so, number one, the police is going to be more likely to get called, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Also, let's say she's living in her own place and he's just a boyfriend, right? She's not financially dependent on him, right? And so she may be more likely to call the police. However, in the black community, are you more likely or less likely to call the police on your abuser,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so and so it's different. So if you live in Weddington, which I think I used to hear that you had to have an acre to build a house in Weddington, right?
Mhm.
Who's going
Mhm.
to hear? Who's going to know what's going on? And is she isolated from any help? Is she dependent on the money that comes into the household? Is she fully financially dependent on him? Is
Mhm.
she a stay at
Mhm.
home mom, who's dependent on his income? And so poverty, though,
Mhm.
it means that more people are going to know what's going on. And
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
police are more likely to get called and he's going to have fewer resources to get out of it.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's where I think with the black population, more black folks are poor in this community.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
And so I suspect that's what it is, but I don't know for sure. But I
Mhm.
suspect
Mhm.
that's what it is. But in my program, I statistically speaking, in terms of race, um, in my program, it's pretty reflective of the population. Now, there are other programs where that are publicly funded,
Mhm, mhm.
and they're going to see a lot more Black clients in the other.
Got it. So social economics plays a major role.
Right, because of lack of resources.
Yeah.
Let's say a wealthy woman or a woman who has a credit card. I had one call me from a cab one time, and she said, um, the cab driver was one of your clients, and he told me to give you a call. This is really funny when stuff like that happens. And I just wanted to see what you could do, but I'm flying home to California
Mm.
to get away from this guy. What poor woman is
And
able
just
to fly home to California
yeah.
to
Yeah.
get away?
Right. Right.
And also, most victims do not go to shelter, and our shelters are full. What does that mean? If most domestic violence isn't physical, if most domestic violence doesn't cause injuries, and yet you've got the shelters that are full, what does that mean in terms of the amount of domestic violence that's out there? Um,
Mhm.
and I want to pay attention to something called coercive control.
Yes.
Coercive control is pretty much underlying all forms of domestic violence, whether physical or not, whether criminal or not. And some
Mhm.
countries, the UK, I believe, has criminalized coercive control.
I did read that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And coercive control, our victims tell us, our survivors tell us that coercive control is worse than the physical abuse
Mm. Mhm.
because they
Mhm.
never know what's coming. And what it
Right.
does is it destroys souls, it
Mhm.
destroys spirits, it destroys self-confidence, it destroys strength.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, our victims tell us that that's the worst. That's the worst
Wow.
thing there.
Because it perpetuates depending on the individual, the abuser,
Yeah,
and they don't see themselves as individuals. They don't see themselves as worthy or valuable.
right.
And so there you go.
Yeah. And oftentimes they don't see it coming. In post-separation abuse, um, I've seen cases where, um, she's trying to ask for money, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
they're separated, and he'll get in her face and start screaming at her at the top of her lungs, right? But he won't touch her.
Mhm.
And he'll
Mhm. Mhm.
scream so loudly that he spits in her face. So she finally pushes his face away. He says, "Bam, I got you now." And he gets a restraining order
Right.
on her.
That reminds me of the case with Johnny Depp and his then, I guess,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and we won't go too deep into that, but that's I'm reminded of that case because it sounded like a lot of that came out in their the prosecuting of their case where she retaliated
Right.
reportedly against him, but that deemed her to be the abuser in
Right.
his mind, in his legal team's mind. Would that
Right.
be accurate?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. When we're not saying that women can't be abusers, but
Sure.
that abuse is completely different.
Hmm.
If we look at it, we'll see that a lot of if they're causing injuries, if they're physical, women usually aren't physical with their abuse, right?
Hmm.
A lot of it is self-defense or retaliatory, um, or she's just had enough,
Hmm. Hmm.
or
Hmm.
she had enough with the last guy.
Mhm.
And so
And you're a
this guy,
representation of that, so now I need to put a stop to it.
I'm putting my foot, yeah, I'm drawing a line right there. If you cross that line, I'm gonna hurt you before you hurt me. And so, how does that look in court? She's guilty.
Sure,
Absolutely.
sure.
And so our prisons are filled with women who have killed their abusers. and they go to prison because in court, it's only going to look like self-defense if you could
Right.
prove you were being attacked. You can't go in there and say you were defending against a an attack you knew was coming.
Mhm. 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 But if coercion is used, you don't have the evidence
Right.
of that.
Yeah. Well, let me give you an example that I use when I train a lot.
Yeah.
So let's say Bill and I are married. Bill has never abused me before, but he's had a really, really bad day. And he comes home, he gets in the shower. I'm cooking his dinner. He's ranting and raving about his day and his job and the drivers and all this. And he comes out of the shower yelling because I've left my wet towels on the floor again. I hit him in the head with that cast iron frying pan and I lay him out. Who is the predominant aggressor? It's
Mhm.
me, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Now, to give the same scenario some context, which the courts are not going to see, right? More than likely, he
Mhm.
has abused me before. I've never called the police on him.
Mhm.
I've never
Mhm.
gotten a restraining order because I think I can handle this. This time, he has told me if I F up again, he's going to kill me.
Mm.
Aren't you proud of me for not saying the word?
I appreciate that.
Because you just know looking at me, I would normally
That's
say the
okay.
word. Anyway, anyway, so this time the abuser is in the shower and he's ranting and raving, and he comes out of the shower and he says quietly, "Did I tell you what was going to happen to you the next time you effed up?"
Mhm.
And he
Mhm.
starts coming toward me.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
I know he's going to kill me this time. I pick up that frying pan and I get to him first and
Yeah,
I lay him out. Who's going to jail?
of course.
I'm
Of
going to jail.
course. Yep.
I caused the injury,
Mhm. Mhm.
but I
Mhm.
knew he was going to kill me. How am I going to prove that in court?
Mm, my goodness. And so you go to jail where the abuser is just not held accountable, other
Right.
than you had to go to such extreme measures to
Right.
protect yourself and possibly
Hopefully.
children in the home or whoever else.
How about this? How about we do have kids in the home and I caused a head injury and now I have to take care of him
Mm, mm,
as
wow.
well as the kids.
Yes.
I've
Yes.
seen that happen before.
Mhm. Unreal. Unreal. I do want to jump to this question. And it's a big one, and I want to get your opinion on this. I kind of know already, but I want to ask this. Pop culture and even some therapists use the term narcissistic abuse. What are your thoughts? I knew it. I knew it. What are your
Ah,
thoughts about that? Because I have my own
ah.
opinions, but I want the expert to just kind of help
Okay,
dive,
my expert reaction is ah.
I get it. I
Okay,
get it.
please don't use that term. It is a pop term, okay?
Mhm.
And most narcissists do not abuse. They're just assholes, right? And they're hard to live with and all
Yes.
that. But
Yes.
our boardrooms are filled with more narcissists than my batterers program.
Mhm.
Okay. So
Mhm.
not all abusers are narcissists and
Mhm.
not all narcissists are abusers. And you can't be going around diagnosing somebody
This is true.
unless you're their therapist.
This is true. This is true.
And it's not helpful. It's
Yes.
not helpful because I know what victims want. They are on a constant journey to know why this man that they fell in love with did this to them.
Right.
But they're never going to get a good answer, right? Because there isn't a good answer.
No.
So therefore, they need to work on their healing
Mhm. Mhm.
no
Mhm.
matter what the answer. So let's say you go to a therapist and you say, "I'm a victim of a narcissist. I'm a victim of
Right.
narcissistic abuse." And that therapist is working on how to deal with an abuser. They don't know the abuser. because they're not seeing him, and
Correct.
they don't have a specialty in understanding abusers or why abusers abuse, right?
Right.
So let's say the same, let's say your house burns down and you lose your pet. You go to therapy to deal with the trauma, but you say, I want to focus on why my house burned down.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Is that going to be effective treatment,
No.
effective therapy? Because then what if you have a flood? You're totally not prepared
Correct.
because you haven't focused on the healing for yourself,
Correct.
despite whatever reasons caused your house to catch on
Mhm.
fire.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So abusers abuse because they can and because they feel entitled to.
Mhm.
Not every
Mhm.
abuser is a narcissist. They're almost all selfish and self centered, right? They
Yes.
abused her. And here's another thing that victims don't want to hear,
Yeah.
they don't want to hear that he despised her.
Mm. Oh, yeah. That's oof. That's a tough one.
Because then she has to deal with her decisions. What is wrong with me that I didn't see this in this
Right.
guy?
Right.
So if
Right.
that's what you're focusing on, you're not focusing on how to get better.
Mhm.
Decide,
Mhm.
the fact that he deceived you,
Yes.
but how do I
Yes.
heal from that? How do I
Right.
become okay with myself without questioning
Correct.
my decisions? Because
Right.
he's the one who abused me. So now I'm going
Yes.
to heal from that. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, 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 definitely. I appreciate that because it's not to victim blame, but it's helping them to take ownership in, okay, yes, that person has some tendencies to be narcissistic, but where do you need that healing? What choices did you make that allowed
Right,
some of these behaviors to perpetuate and keep you in that space so that you can
right,
learn from it and grow and not repeat or even stay in that same situation? It
right,
completely removes or absolves the person from that if the direction is thinking, oh, okay, well, let's focus on this, like you said, the flood or the house burned down versus
right.
I'm reeling here and I'm
I'm
in pain.
hurting. I'm hurting. How do
Yeah.
I heal from this pain? Now, there are some situations where it's helpful if
Mm.
somebody has truly been diagnosed with a narcissistic personality disorder, or children who grew up with narcissistic parents who, may not have been physically abusive. That is helpful in some situations to
Sure.
understand
Sure.
what a narcissistic personality is.
Yeah.
But keep in mind that a narcissistic personality disorder is not an excuse for being abusive,
Correct.
right? Because there
Correct.
is nothing in the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder that says abuse,
Not that I've seen. DSM doesn't point that out.
right?
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
and speaking of mental illness,
Yeah.
um, doesn't pathologize any abuse. There is nothing
Mhm.
for abusers, no abuser category in the DSM. That's because it's not mental illness, it's a behavior.
Correct. Correct. A chosen one at that.
Yes.
Yeah, a chosen one at that.
And it
Tell us,
doesn't mean
yeah,
they're not hurting. It doesn't mean
of
they're not
course.
hurting, right?
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. And that's why we talked about the anger piece and that perceived threat of abandonment or
Right,
rejection. Yes,
right,
people experience pain, but the difference is the choice to harm, to inflict pain, to someone else who is
right.
the assumed abuser. Tell us about impact. What can you share with us about impact, your
Oh, I'm
program?
really excited. For a long time, we've been separate from our nonprofit. We are now merging. We have merged. And so we have a new name for the whole nonprofit. And it's called Impact Plus
Ooh.
Abuse Prevention Services.
Oh,
And so that will
nice.
allow us to expand our services beyond working with identified abusers. But the impact program itself is a state certified abuse intervention program in North Carolina, we're considered DVIPs, domestic violence intervention programs.
Mm-hmm.
Nationally, in other places, you may see the term BIP,
Yes.
battering intervention
Invention
program.
programs.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
telling you all this in case your listeners need to look for a program in their
Sure.
areas. That's what
Absolutely.
they Google. That's what they
Yes.
Google. And
Yes.
so what we do is we work with court identified, DSS identified, self identified, pastor identified, therapist identified, abusers, those who have committed acts of intimate partner abuse, whether or not it's been violent. And we work with them in a group setting, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of this is regulated by the state. I'm certified in 5 North Carolina counties:
Mm-hmm.
Mecklenburg, Union, Gaston, Cleveland, and Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
But I could take people from other counties if they don't have the services in those counties.
Okay.
So it's a group program, and we have a curriculum um, that that we follow. And what it does is it takes apart, has them look at why they abused, right? And we've talked about a lot of that already. It's
Mm-hmm.
because of entitlement, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
We
Yeah.
and then we dismantle those beliefs that led them to abuse and provide them with alternatives. And so it's a long process. So the program itself is a minimum of 26 weeks long, an hour and
Okay.
a half a week. We have both virtual and in person. The virtual are only when they cannot attend in person, because the in person is, we feel more effective. And
Sure.
these guys build relationships too. They build friendships,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sometimes for the first time, because men, we do not give our men permission to talk out their stuff, you
Typically
know,
not. Yes.
typically not.
Yes.
Every now and then, but then, playing a sport together doesn't do it. You're not going to be very real with, stuff that you don't want to be judged in, like a men's group at church and that kind of thing. So,
Mm-hmm.
so this gives them a place to do that.
Sure.
And so we also have a program called Legacy that's supported by the nonprofit. When my guys are finished with the Impact program, they're
Mm-hmm.
invited to become Legacy members. And as Legacy members, they continue to do their work. And then they also come back and help other guys in the impact groups understand some of the concepts.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's great. And then
Yeah.
we have access to their families, their partners, and we have activities that include them. And some activities are just for the legacy members. We do equine facilitated learning.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
yeah, we have some really great stuff going on. And I've got guys who are coming back from 16 years ago who are still coming back and staying
Still
and getting
coming back.
involved.
I love that systemic approach where you're not just looking to them to work on their stuff, but you're also reaching into their intimate community so that they can expand their learning and their ability to change basically, or create new paths for
Right,
themselves
right.
and potentially
Yeah,
change the trajectory for the kids or the
right.
next generation that's coming behind. I love
Right.
that. That
And
is
then,
awesome.
yeah, so we're hoping to build some mentoring programs. There is an information line, like a hotline, a helpline for abusers. It
Mm.
started out of Pennsylvania. And it's expanded to other states, and I'm hoping that Impact Plus will be able to bring that here.
Yes.
So I would like to start groups for men who may be bordering on abuse, but not really abusive or not abusive yet. And so kind of an impact light. So we've got lots of plans, lots of ideas, and we would appreciate any support in terms of donations. Board
Absolutely.
board members, if you're interested, we're looking for right now for folks who can help us with branding and logos for our new merged program. So we're
Impact
really
Plus.
excited. Impact Plus, we're
I
really excited. I
love
came
it.
up with that. Is that
I
good?
It's awesome. I think
Thank
it's
you.
fantastic. I love it, and
Thank
I'm glad that
you.
you're sharing it with us so we can be aware of that. It's a
I'm very
great
excited.
program. Yeah, it's a great program. What would you say your success rate has been with Impact?
There's no way to tell. There
Yeah.
really is no way to tell other than following these guys home every day for the rest of their
Yeah.
lives. There's
Yeah.
really no way to tell. What we know is that recidivism is very small, but
Okay.
not all our clients are court ordered. And we
That's
don't know why a
true.
victim may or may not report abuse
Mhm.
in the future. We
Mhm.
don't know.
Mhm.
So that's not a good number, but it's the only solid number that we can give people.
Yeah.
Most of my successes are anecdotal. It's victims who stay in touch with me, who let me know what's going on. It's
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
victims who friend me on Facebook in
Mhm.
order to
Mhm.
keep getting all the information that I put out there.
Yeah.
And so it's anecdotal. And thankfully, in 17 years of running Impact, um, I've only, and I don't want to minimize it, but I've had one murder of a guy who completed my program. I had one murder, and that was just recently at the beginning of the pandemic. And he
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
been charged um, multiple times since that he finished my program.
Yeah.
Um, there's nothing we can do if somebody is
Sure.
doing all the work in the program. There's nothing we can do to stop them from finishing. Now if they're clearly a risk, we intervene and we do whatever we can. But this guy was just like any other guy. He was
Mhm.
really young in the program. Um, and yeah, he went on to kill, I think 6 or 7 years later.
Wow. Wow. So rehabilitation really depends on the individual, how
Absolutely.
they take the program, what they do with it, how they apply it in their lives, and choose to be different.
And just like with substance abuse, they don't have
Yes.
to want to be there. That's a myth. They do not have to want to
Mm.
be there to get better. Most of
Mm.
them don't want to be here,
This is true. Yeah.
but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean they're not going to get better. And sometimes it's the least likely guys who
Yeah.
work the most and come out with, like, I had one guy that I actually terminated at one point and then started him back in another group to give him another chance because I saw a lot of potential there. And he came out, he's just redesigned part of my curriculum and come up with his own like chart that explains things better to the other guys than my curriculum does.
Wow.
Wow. Didn't see that coming.
Didn't it?
Because at first he
Right.
was like, I was violating all his constitutional rights.
But then something took seed.
Something clicked.
And he's now able to pay it forward. I love it. I love it.
Yep.
You know, as the expert who does this work day in and day out, what do you want the general population, for just the community, to know about abusers? Dispelling misconceptions. You just shared one with us, that they don't have to be there to want to change.
Okay. Believe the victim, believe the
Please.
survivor. Okay. The likelihood of false allegations are less than 4%. Okay.
That's good
So
to
believe
know.
believe the victim. Understand that most domestic violence is not criminal, but that doesn't mean that it's not abuse and that he's not abusive. And we will
Correct.
help all abusers. By the way, my nonprofit provides scholarships too for the guys who
Nice.
can't afford to attend otherwise. That's where most of the money, the donations go to,
Go
is
to.
to help these guys through the program. My
Hmm.
hashtags, I have a couple of hashtags, Vanessa, that
Yes, please share. Please share. Yes.
one is only abusers can stop abuse.
Yes. I love
Ding,
it. I love
ding,
it.
right?
Yes. Yes.
What we do with victims is so important, but what we're trying to do is help them heal and stay safe. We're
Yes.
not addressing the problem by working with, because the victim's already done everything she can,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes.
And it's not on her. And the other one is, this is my newer one. We work with abusers for victims.
Oh, that's good. You came up with that one too, didn't you?
I'm a wordsmith, right?
I love it. But that's exactly what it is. You're thinking about the system, but we're going to
Right,
this particular section so that we can then
right,
translate the healing
right.
process to them. I love that. No, that is great. I love those hashtags, and I'm definitely going to share those. To wrap up, how can the community support the impact program?
Um, Referrals, talking to your therapist and your pastor, your neighbor
Hmm.
about there is help for him.
Yes.
There is help for him.
Yes.
Now, there are groups for women as well, women abusers, but there are so few women abusers that there's no sense in me duplicating that and
Hmm.
having my own program. And
Hmm.
so I tell people most domestic violence is not criminal, but it doesn't mean that it's not abuse.
Yes.
And there is help for him, and there is help for you. Victims of any kind of abuse have access to the same services
Yes.
except for shelter. They have to be
Right.
in physical danger to go to
Sure.
shelter.
Yes.
But otherwise, counseling and that kind of thing, you're going to be able to get counseling from domestic violence services, even if he's never been physically or criminally abusive. Okay.
Right.
And what else? Children are watching, children are impacted, regardless of whether or not they've been directly abused. What
Yes.
else can I say? Oh, pay attention to the language in the media. Call the
Mm.
media and ask them to clarify things or use different language when they use terms like a domestic dispute. What
Yes.
does that mean?
Yes.
It means
That's
nothing. I could
correct.
dispute with somebody and not threaten, not get killed, right? Domestic violence is about, in order for domestic violence to happen, domestic abuse to happen, there has to be a power differential
Differential. Mhm.
in the
Mhm.
relationship.
Mhm.
That's what defines the difference between other kinds of arguments and toxic relationships and all of that. Does one person have the power to hurt the other one, whether it's financial power, physical power, um, social capital?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
does one person have the potential to hurt the other person because they have more power in the relationship?
Yes. Yes.
That's where that almost always has to happen in order for abuse to happen. And
Yes.
that's where abuse gets defined separately from other kinds of violence or maltreatment.
Mhm. 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 So the moral there, takeaway there, action there is to donate, donate, donate. Because if we go to the root cause of it, we won't necessarily need, excuse me, so much support for
Right,
victims because we're dealing with the abusers so that they can
right.
potentially change the thought process, the belief system, and the behaviors that's just so rampant.
Let's disrupt those generational cycles as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just so appreciate you. I could sit here with you and just keep listening and
And
asking
you know I could
questions.
keep talking forever.
I know you can, and I love it. But I'm grateful. Thank you, B. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This was so important, and I just look forward to having more talks with you in the future, and looking
Thank
forward to
you.
learning more about Impact Plus.
Yay! Thank
Yes,
you so
I'm
much, Vanessa.
excited.
Hello, everybody out
Absolutely.
there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right.